Hello, and thanks for joining us. My name is Nino Di Cara. I'm the founder of Electric Autonomy Canada, and over a 6-week period, we're hosting a series of panel discussions with leaders from across the battery and automotive sectors to explore the potential for a national Canadian electric vehicle battery supply chain. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Invest in Canada. Invest in Canada works with global investors to unlock business ventures and facilitate expansion in Canada. We're grateful for their support for this series. In this, the fourth of our discussion series, we focus on active materials and Canada's potential as a manufacturer of EV battery cells. Canada has huge growth potential in this sector, but cost of manufacturing continues to be a recurring issue. So how do we solve this and get Canada manufacturing? Well, to unpack this topic, I'd like to welcome and introduce you to our expert panelists who are going to help set the scene for this important discussion. And I'd like to invite our panelists to turn their videos on and welcome everybody. They are Flavio Volpe, President at Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, or the APMA. Sankar Gupta, Chairman and CEO and co-founder at Electrovaya. Adrian Tylim, Business Development Americas at Blue Solutions. Ryan Castillo, Managing Director at Adamas Intelligence, who will be moderating today's discussion. Thank you, panelists, and over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Nino. As mentioned, my name is Ryan Castillo, and I have the honor and privilege of moderating the panel today. Thank you very much to the organizers and the sponsors for coordinating today's event. It's a pleasure to be here. So we'll just jump right in with a question to you, Flavio, if I may. What time frame would we be looking at to get our house in order in Canada to establish itself as a battery cluster? And what are the key goals that need to be achieved for us to get there?
Thanks for an easy question up front, Ryan, and pleasure and an honor to be on this panel.
Thank you.
You know, to establish what that time frame should be and how do we get there, we got to work backwards from when are car companies going to need batteries? Right now, you know, 2% of annual sales or so are electric vehicles. And certainly there isn't enough scale for anybody to be building a factory here, to be supplying an OEM here. And we see what the strategies of the OEMs for sourcing has been. Overlaid onto that is we've got this new USMCA, the NAFTA 2.0, that says that at in full transition, 75% of a series of core parts have to be regionally sourced. One of those core parts is a battery. And if you don't get there and the vehicle doesn't qualify, then it also has to be sold with a tariff on it, about 2.5%, but really meaningful in our business when most auto companies are operating on single-digit EBITDA, and on some programs less than that. When is this market going to arrive so that we can actually have the underpinning of a battery cluster? Because we're not a centrally planned economy, and we don't have state-owned enterprises here that are going to build some massive vertically integrated facility that then whose products then get forced on the market. Well, the 2030s are going to be really important for zero-emission vehicles, and ostensibly that means electric vehicles, but also, of course, fuel cells and everything else in between. Jurisdictions like Japan and UK and Europe and California Air Resources Board that really kind of started us down this path on environmental responsibility and transportation in the early 70s are going to dictate what that market looks like. And what they're all saying is, look, by the 2030s, somewhere in the 2030s, you can't sell an internal combustion engine vehicle only in that market. Well, in the auto business, of course, 15 years, 10 to 20 years, but 15 in the middle is nothing. That's 2 programs. You launch a new RAM platform, you're going to be running that for about 7 years. So you've got really 2 platforms to get there. If those jurisdictions are serious, and I'm going to say big if, if they're serious, they will drive every single jurisdiction, including the one that we live in, to adopt that as standard. If they do that, we're going to see 2% go up to 50%, go up to 90%, somewhere over the next couple of decades of the on-road fleet. So all of these car companies, and we're seeing them all now line up and say by General Motors just anteed up again and said, we're going to spend, $100 billion, $30 billion in electrifying the fleet further by 2025. Ford said we're doing an F-150, electric F-150, which is a very important vehicle, the number one selling vehicle in the US. Toyota, Honda, Volkswagen, JLR, every single one of them is tripping over themselves to say, we will offer that by the 2030s. So when do we need to get there? And how do we get our house in order? Well, Ford said it's going to make battery electric vehicles only in Oakville. That's about 300,000 cars a year. And they're going to do that in 2023 for the 2024 model year. So we need to get our house in order yesterday.
Yeah.
General Motors is going to do that in Ingersoll. We know Toyota is going to do some in Woodstock and Cambridge. We know that Stellantis is going to do it in Windsor, and we haven't heard yet from Honda, but I know that Honda's never one to come in second place.
Yeah.
We need in the next year or two to establish firmly that we are either raw material suppliers or we are cell suppliers, or a combination of both. Because otherwise, those decisions will be made in other places. We have some advantages, but once they lock in what their new NAFTA sources are, it'll be hard to jump back in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great points off the top. And I think it leads us well into our next point of discussion. Sankar, are you worried about the speed at which Canada is or is not growing and vertically integrating to take advantage of that opportunity along the supply chain?
Yes, and thanks again for inviting me, and really honored to be speaking to you. I think Canada is going at a fairly decent speed. You should not be too early, then the bus hasn't arrived, and you shouldn't be too late, as Flavio just suggested. Then of course, very hard to jump back into the market. And I think this the NAFTA 2 is going to be very critical because the large market is south of where we are. So I'm not too worried on the speed side. It's going well. I feel your point on vertically integrating the battery supply chain. Again, I feel very strongly that cell manufacturing is the critical technology, and it is the technology needed for battery supply chain. Now, the battery supply chain, which is the materials and various other things, has to work very extremely closely with the cell manufacturing in order to receive validation and be a supplier. Not an easy thing to do. This engine has to pull the supply chain, as against very difficult to push the rope. So when you look at other places, China and contiguous areas like Korea, and really China did push the electrification market probably 5-10 years ahead of us. They've developed a very strong ecosystem where the material suppliers have been working very closely with the cell manufacturing. And both teams need to have decisive research and engineering talents behind them. Generally, a branch plant cell manufacturer, I believe, will not work very well because head offices, which houses their development team, will use their own validated supply chain. So battery cells are very finicky, and needs the material supplier to have the exact material with correct microstructure, crystallinity, coating, absorb groups and surface properties and so on. It takes time to be together. So Canada always will be the supplier of lower value raw materials to the folks who produces and processes the raw materials and makes the value added battery materials for the cell maker. So the question you're asking is how to climb up the value chain. So again, in my opinion, we need to support, or the Canadian policy should support folks companies who are either headquartered here or who have substantial technology and development people here who can drive the innovation and ultimately to become the world leader in this market.
Excellent points. That dovetails very well with my next question for Adrian, which is, why is it hard for companies like yourselves at the end of the supply chain to do business in a more local North American market, be it from sourcing of the raw materials through to production and selling of your battery products?
Ryan, thank you. It's good to be with all of you, Flavio, Sankar, and thank you, Nino, for having me here. It's a great question, and I think that as a form of an introduction, Blue Solutions is the only manufacturer of commercially available all solid-state batteries. Our batteries today are well suited for larger vehicles, and this is the third generation today that we're manufacturing our batteries, and for everything that we produce in Quebec actually is exported and used by Daimler, a great part of it in Europe. So we have, and this is the third generation, if you will, of our batteries. So we're mostly talking about passenger vehicles, which is where, you know, the volumes will be, and the challenge that we all need to meet. And from our own point of view, as the only manufacturer of all solid-state batteries, we know that we need to continue to evolve with our technology to be able to meet the needs of the car manufacturers. And we're doing that, and we believe that we're going to be there in about 4 or 5 years or so with a product that is fast charging, ambient temperature, and well suited for passenger cars and all platforms, if you will. So from a materials point of view, raw materials, in the past, we used to source much of our raw materials from Canada. We're based in Quebec, and, you know, we have mines, lithium mines, and so forth. And because of the competitive nature of the industry, we have to start sourcing them abroad, and mostly in China. So we would love to be able to have the availability of materials locally from an environmental point of view, sustainability point of view, you know, and particularly in Quebec, for example, with the green electricity from hydroelectric sources to make our product extremely competitive. So there are 2 points we feel that we're in the middle, as we all agree. On one hand, the availability of the materials, which I'm sure we'll be talking about. On the other is the demand, and which is growing. And I think that for companies like us to continue to be competitive or be more competitive, particularly with the pressures now coming from the large investments in the US and, you know, and competing products coming from Europe and so forth, the government support, we believe that is extremely important. And if we look at in the case of the US, you know, there are all kinds of incentives for buyers of electric vehicles in other countries as well. So I think that to the extent that the government can support that and provide the incentive, everybody will align, if you will. And I think that the demand will be created. And to the extent also that the government can incentivize companies in Canada to use native manufacturing, if you will, right? So for example, bus and truck manufacturers to align with us, then I think that we will all also contribute on the back end as well in terms of the environmental impact of what we're doing and so forth. So I think that we're getting there, but the government support is essential, and I don't think, in my mind, that is enough to provide enough pressure, if you will, on the local companies to take advantage of what we really have in Canada.
Great points. Thank you, Adrian. Flavio, I'd like to circle back and expand on a little bit of what we discussed earlier. So how exactly, if we talk more specifics, we know we need to do it yesterday. We know we need to get moving to take advantage of the opportunity ahead. But how do you think exactly we can get our first large-scale cell factory in Canada? And perhaps it's obvious, but who would those likely clients be for that? Would it be those poster childs for electrification that you discussed, the EV makers, or would it be in commercial or forklifts or other avenues?
Look, I think we have a robust business prospect in non-passenger vehicles, forklifts, buses. I think that my two other esteemed colleagues here are doing well in those categories. The volumes in those are not the light vehicle ones, and certainly you'd like to to springboard from those into the big light vehicle volumes. If we look at the players, so the dynamics are 80% of the 75% of the vehicles we make in Canada, so about 1.5 to 1.6 million, go to American consumers. With apologies to Toyota and Honda, who have a very robust build where you sell a Canadian market. I think that the growth in our EV volumes will be driven by the U.S. consumer market. So you've got Ford that says it's going to build battery electric vehicles in 2024. You've also got General Motors that said that they're going to do a commercial, exclusively their commercial light trucks in Ingersoll. I think that's probably where the first two opportunities lie. And so what are those two companies? General Motors is going down a path with their own brand, an Ultium brand, and they've announced two different battery factories in the U.S. Be interesting to see whether there's enough volume for a third one for us. And then from the Ford point of view, they've committed in their public announcements that they're going to have some battery manufacturing in-house. My instinct is that the most efficient way to do that, if you've got a plant that's running at peak efficiency, you don't have a few 100,000 square feet to spare to do the battery manufacturing there. There's an opportunity, of course, for somebody to turn around and say, well, we're going to do that separate from the plant, supplying Ford here. Battery packs are big and don't travel well. And in our business, we know it's concentric circles of supply. The bigger the piece, the closer it is to the factory. And so we've got a real shot there. Are there other players that would would import Canadian batteries to their U.S. plants? I mean, for those logistic reasons, I don't think that that's the most optimal model. I think that our best shots are the 5 existing OEMs that are manufacturing here. Ford is a real interesting one because it's got, not only do we have that plant in Oakville, we also make engines in Windsor, Essex for the F-150. And with the F-150 going electric in Dearborn, there's an opportunity for some of that supply chain to be built, from Oakville vehicles to Windsor, maybe motors instead of engines, battery somewhere in between. And we supply all of that production, and we do F-150, Mustang, and whatever other battery electrics come from Oakville. There are new entrants. Certainly we're building one car, but I need to buy one battery in Project Arrow. But I think that as we get to the end of this decade, there are going to be several startups in this country, Silicon Valley type startups that can aggregate in order that if there's 5 or 6 of them, could be enough of one order for one battery manufacturer. Where the milk gets in the coconut is in the IP of the chemistry, and to what degree a lot of companies will want to share the same battery chemistry. I use the analogy of the various German competitive manufacturers early in the last decade, who came together and shared a Blue Tech diesel engine that went into various Mercedes, BMWs, Volkswagens. And so they didn't have enough to man all of them. They pooled it. That could be another opportunity for a battery manufacturer here in Canada.
Okay. Great points and lots of food for thought, and definitely an exciting space to be watching as it's evolving. Adrian, I wanted to circle back to you, and a little bit of a hypothetical here, but assume that we can, and the demand is there, and that we go about building battery factories or a single battery factory in Canada, at least a large scale one. Do you think that we have currently the skills, the talent, and the human resources in Canada to make this happen, to operate it, to run it to scale?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And just to put it in context, we are vertically integrated, as Sankar was suggesting. So we make the cells, we make the packs, the modules, the pack, and actually aligned to what Flavio just mentioned, we would also license the technology. We have the opportunity as well. With regards to the talent, so we are at a giga factory scale, if you will, the way we've been manufacturing. We don't have the gigawatt yet. We have about a half a gigawatt hour between our 2 factories, one of them located in Quebec. and we're going to be expanding. And we have found challenges in hiring people and finding talent. So to that extent, there is a lot of innovation, universities, there's support system there. We have a number of R&D centers, including the Hydro-Québec as well, close to where we are in terms of the solid state. And so the know-how is there. I think that we need to continue to develop, if you will, the skills, the training, at all levels of manufacturing, as well as continuing to produce an investment in innovation. So right now it's a challenging market. I think a lot of it has to do with the economy growing post-COVID and so forth. But nevertheless, you can see that as the demand increases, this is something that will need to be at the focus of the government on how to prepare the workforce so that we can really meet the challenge, right? And we're not going to be behind just because we don't have enough skills.
Great points. Sankar, you talked a little bit earlier about the need to get the demand engine going, and that will fuel the market's growth rather than trying to push on a rope, as the old adage goes. What exactly is needed to get a commitment for that demand engine for gigascale battery cell factories in Canada? And how can manufacturing costs help or hurt Canada's business case in that regard?
Ryan, very broad question, so I'll go rambling a little bit, but I'll try not to ramble. I think Flavio has hit them a nail on the head a lot, and let me start one thing. On the commitment side, we are in NAFTA 2.0. And so the cell factory has to have markets for the commitment, no question. And there is a large move in the US happening for Buy America. And if Invest Canada is listening, Buy America must include Canada, or should, the Global Affairs Canada, etc. So this NAFTA 2.0 is going to be very, very important. Just as an example, President Biden the other day talked about $24 billion he's going to spend on certain electric buses. And he's going Buy America there. 75% of that bus has to be produced in the US. So that's a big question. The other interesting thing is we think the electric car, if you think of the battery, it's still emerging. The technology is emerging. And an emerging technology has got some interesting aspects. The winner or losers are not defined yet. In an electric car, which has got the body, the chassis, the electric motor, that is not emerging. That's more or less, it'll evolve, but there's no breakthroughs happening. In the battery business, there is breakthroughs happening. And so whether the old battery cell makers will win out, or whether people like Blue Solution or Electrovaya will make a big dent in it, remains to be seen. So it'll be interesting. Our experience, I think we are just now focusing on commercial vehicles, and mainly because of very simple reason. The commercial vehicles pays a little bit more for higher performing batteries. And the Electrovaya battery has got very, very superior performance. Superior performance in longevity, superior performance in safety, etc. So the commercial vehicle guys will pay a little bit more for that. It's like my daughter. I tell her, hey, that perfume, it smells the same. But no, she will go and spend 3 times more on a Chanel No. 5 or something. So.
So in that regard, do you think that Canada's access to raw materials and its access to low cost hydropower can serve as a manufacturing cost advantage, or are there just too many other items that outweigh those?
There's too many other items. It's really the technology, right? It's always the technology. Bolivia has got tremendous amount of lithium. I have not seen much lithium based electrode cathodes, anything being made over there. So I think So I think the technology is very, very important. So it will be, and the, your second question was the production cost, right? The production cost. And the production cost is always driven by technology. Better technology reduces cost. Just I'll give you an example. In the cell manufacturing process, they use the standard process used in Asia, for example, uses very large quantities of a toxicant, of a solvent, massive quantities of a solvent called N-methylpyridine. And this solvent is known to produce birth defects. And uh, whenever you're using toxic chemicals, your usage drives up cost. Electrovaya used to own and operate the largest lithium-ion battery plant in Europe, in Germany. Our customer was Daimler. And that toxic chemical usage drove up our costs so high in an environmentally conscious country like Germany that it was very, very difficult to compete with something made in China, etc. So we believe that the technology is very important. And I'm not pitching Electrovaya at all, but we have a technology which doesn't use toxic chemicals. So suddenly our cost of production goes very much less. Now, the question is, why are we focusing on buses, trucks, and materials handling equipment? Is because they're early adopters. We used to make batteries for the Daimler smart car, but we were a little ahead of the market. That market did not emerge very fast. So so we are focused on slightly higher value products. And I believe a technology like ours should also go into the light electric vehicles as well. And it's now, then it'll be a question of, is there enough sufficient investments to build those 10, 15 gigawatt hour plants? So let's see how it all goes.
Yeah, and just a quick question, Sankar, to round off this part of the discussion. Are there any obvious carrots or sticks that the Canadian government can leverage to try and get this, giga scale factories building here? Whether it be through, like we're seeing south of the border, where a certain percentage of the vehicle needs to be sourced locally. Would something like that work in Canada, or are there other carrots, perhaps incentives that can be put in place to get these major tier 1 battery manufacturers in the EV space to come and set up here rather than in the US?
Ryan, somebody who's manufacturing with toxic chemicals in China is maybe tier 1 in China, but may not become tier 1 in Canada because of the environmental costs. That's what we found when we were running the Daimler operation in Germany. So there's a bit of a change. Now, of course, I personally think Canada's materials, the mines, we lost Noranda, we lost Falconbridge, Alcan, Enco, all the head offices disappeared. And with that, technology disappears. And so in the battery materials, you've got to be better than Bolivia. You've got to be able to put a lot of technology in the battery materials so that the electric cell makers can use it. And I think that is very important. That's why I personally like companies to work with who has the engineering and research talents locally, in addition to the materials being available locally.
Yep, thank you for that perspective, Sankar. So I now have a question for the group, and perhaps we'll start with you, Flavio. Are the gaps that we're seeing in this so-called mushy middle of chemicals and precursors and active materials in any way an indication that Canada or potentially foreign investors are having a crisis of confidence in its capabilities? Flavio, can you kick us off on that one?
No, I don't think it's a crisis of confidence, but I think the Canadian government and as well the Ontario and Quebec governments especially have to understand that in this race, this EV race into this market that's going to be articulated by regulation, the biggest partner is the public balance sheet. We're competing against China, and Sankar quite properly suggested that China's standards for the cleanliness of that processing isn't what we might consider here. but also the fact that they're all state-owned enterprises mean that their expected returns on investment have a 4,000-year arc rather than a quarterly arc. And the Americans have decided that, well, to hell with the WTO rules on procurement, we're going to go far beyond the 25% local content requirements in this and go to 75%, and then infuse the market with tens and over hundreds of billions of dollars in public procurement. So on one hand, we've got state-owned enterprise and a centrally planned economy, and now we've got a free market that we're part of, but their industrial policy is going to risk leaving us behind. Canadian government, Ontario government, Quebec government have to understand that just because we have the dirt in the ground and the vehicle production here doesn't mean that space in the middle is going to work by itself. None of these companies who are going to process, we're going to mine and process and make cells are charities. Yet that scale hasn't shown up yet. So they don't have the anchor order to then justify the pro forma. So that gap financing over the next few years has to have a different risk profile, has to have a different quantum. If you want to have batteries made in Canada, you have to step in and be the processing bank, so that Adrian and Sankar can aggressively go after that Ford business and be able to say, yes, the batteries that we put together have their raw material sourced here at the scale that you need, so that those batteries not just qualify from a technical point of view, also qualify for your USMCA tariff exemption point of view. Do they get it? I mean, the federal government did announce $8 billion in a net zero accelerator fund. The question will be into where that goes. Yep. If we give Ford $300 million from the feds and $300 million from the province, $600 million on a $1.8 or $9 billion investment, that's a very healthy quantum, and I commend both the companies and the country to come together on it. But why not start to think in terms of, look, there's a kicker in place, and it's another 300 million on the 600 million if you invest in processing, or you find a partner that invests in processing that feeds the chemicals and the raw materials up through their supply chain. If we don't, we're going to be left behind by our biggest partner and our biggest competitor, and we'll always make cars in Canada. We have a very healthy value prop for selling cars into the US, and we'll always dig the lithium out of the ground in Madawaska. But if that lithium goes somewhere else before it comes back here, we've missed the opportunity of a generation.
Agree 100%. And I think, Adrian, I'd love to hear from you as a vertically integrated cell producer. What are your thoughts? Are the gaps that we see in this midstream indicative of a lack of confidence in Canada's capabilities, or is it something else?
I do think that this gap is needs to be filled, and I think that to some extent many of the companies are hesitant because they see, if in a free market you're going to go to the lowest denominator, you're going to go to those places where you can, you have the conditions. Let's say South Carolina, maybe incentivizing plants to go there, right, with tax credits and things like that. But it reminds me because decades ago, in the solar industry, the US did a couple of things. They provided a lot of loans for development of the technology, and you have companies that fail, like Solindra and so forth. But also they provided a tax credit for the buyers of the solar power plants to put them on the roofs and be able to reduce their costs. What happened there is that the Chinese actually ended up manufacturing, and it was imported into the US, and the photovoltaic panel manufacturing in the US, were actually eliminated. So it seems to me that the conditions are there. That now we have lessons learned, right? How to do it right. So on one hand, we need the demand. On the other hand, we need the incentives for the local manufacturing to be able to satisfy that demand, right? And you have to connect all of that. So we have everything that it takes. We have companies, like Sankar's, ours, that manufacture the cells. Not every battery is suited for every application. So the market is huge, right? And the question is, okay, to the large OEMs, you want to manufacture here. So this is the way that we like to do it here in Canada. And by the way, you want to ship it back to the US? Okay, here we're going to provide an ecosystem that would allow you to do that fulfill all of these made in America requirements, final assembly, etc. And I think that we can really create a formula that enhances all of our value from a continental point of view now, because there's so much that we can offer and so much that we can do better when we work together.
Certainly. And Sankar, I think we've heard from you perhaps that some of these gaps maybe exist for a reason, given that it's cheaper to manufacture in other jurisdictions because of lower environmental standards that translate to lower cost. Do you think going forward with more transparency and more emphasis on ESG and environmental, social governance related aspects of these supply chains that Canada will have a leg up on some of those other regions that help it offset some of those cost disadvantages?
You know, Ryan, I think Flavio mentioned it well, and I'll come to the answer. Just now, I feel there is no globally dominant player in lithium-ion cells and batteries. There are regional players who are very big in their regions, whether it's China or Korea, but that global dominance is not yet worked out. It will happen. It'll happen in the next 5 years. There'll be 3, 4, 5 companies who will become dominant. And I believe the dominance will come through 2 things: technology and markets, access to markets and team up. So it'd be interesting to see how that derives. Now, Canada, what can Canada do? Canada is in a very nice position sitting there, and it, as Flavio said, it has a great balance sheet. And if you look at the Department of Energy, 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, it put its money in a number of places, and including in a electric car company called Tesla. I think DOE gave them a 400, 500 million US dollar a check. And look what has Tesla done. It was a high risk project, but Tesla has created the electric vehicle market and has done very well for American technology, American markets, American job creation, etc. So I think we would like Canada has a chance that opening is there today to use its balance sheet and really support cell making, battery making in Canada. Absolutely. It will be the engine of growth for electric vehicles. If you got a better battery, that's what's driving it. You know, we work with a lot with the Toyota group now, who is selling our products both in US and overseas as well. And we are seeing that the battery is driving which vehicle the customer buys. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity for Canada today.
Absolutely. So with great opportunity comes great risk, and perhaps we need to embrace a little bit of that, and put our toes over the line of comfort in order to maximize the benefits that we can yield. That's what it sounds like.
That's very much true. And when the US put the money into Tesla, which I think it was about 15 years ago, it was a high risk. But wow, look at the and the US does take technology risks, and I think that's what Flavio is suggesting is Canada should take some technology risk. You have to go after it, but the risk is much less today because that electrification is happening globally, and because of climate change and other areas, electrification will happen, and there will become some dominant 5, 6, 7 dominant lithium-ion battery makers in the world, and Canada should try to generate one or more of in that area.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. Well said. So I'd like to move to the final question I have for the group, after which we'll then look at some of the questions that have come in throughout the panel. But we'll start on this question with Adrian, if we will. And in a sentence, what do you think needs to happen now for Canada to avoid falling into the historical trap of being just an exporter of raw materials to the rest of the world? So let's start with Adrian, then we can go to Sankar, and then we'll finish up with Flavio.
Yeah, so again, the market and the demand is already created, right, by all these regulatory environments that we saw. For example, we talk about, actually Flavio mentioned California as an example. And the growth I believe that the growth in electric vehicles is going to be much more rapid than what people are predicting, and there is no going back. On the other hand, you also have the pressure from not only the market, but even investors. We saw what happened with the oil majors and all that, okay? So I think that those are gonna be accelerating. So what we need to do is we need to have the foundational basis, both on the reduction of the cost of materials and also on the incentives for the industry, our industry, to be producing in Canada so that we can be the lowest cost producer, if you will, and we can be a better, a more appealing, if you will, option for the U.S. market for sure, which will be able to satisfy handily.
And Sankar, anything to add on that?
Yes, the race for batteries and cells is, I believe, wide open. There is today no winners yet. Nobody knows who is going to be the winners. There are some early leaders there, and I believe that Canada, if it supports with its balance sheet some strongly headquartered companies here, or with very strong domestic research and engineering, and move away from its dependence on branch plants, then there is a possibility that Canada can create one of the 5, 6, 7 global leaders in batteries, which will be absolutely dominant for the next 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Flavio, what do you think needs to happen for Canada to avoid falling into this historical trap of simply exporting to the rest of the world?
Just act differently. We will be the feedstock for all the winners. And so pick a winner or 2 or 5. And no one will become a winner simply relying on the free market, because we're not competing with anybody else who's playing free market baseball. And you see 2 companies on the screen here on Project Arrow. I think through our RFP process, we've discovered 8 or 9 companies across this country that are somewhere in that cell making process. We do have native intelligence, and we do have a lot of great companies that are already supplying a small market globally. And the government of Canada has to stop thinking that these companies are small because they're uncompetitive. They're small because there's 2 million electric vehicles being made annually. They'd be bigger if it was 20, and they'd be bigger when it's 100, unless we let the Chinese do it.
Great point. So I'm now going to shift gears, and we'll take a look at some of the questions that have come in throughout this panel. Thank you to all for your inputs thus far. I think you've given everybody that's on the line a lot of food for thought, and a lot of hope for the future, given the opportunities that we're currently facing. So I'll direct this question to all of you. Perhaps we'll start with you again, Adrian. Given the supply chain complexity and necessary proximity to both raw materials and cell purchasers, does it make sense for Canada to build, say, a government-backed solar-powered gigafactory in Alberta to produce cells and foment a just transition from a fossil-centric economy? Likewise, perhaps in Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, BC, and so on.
I think that, for the government to own and create that factory, if you will, I'm not sure that would be the best path forward, right? Or the best use, if you will, of taxpayers' money. There are, like Flavio mentioned, there are about 8 companies. I don't know who the other 6 are, but he sure does. That are already involved there. What they need is the government support, but not the government to be competing with us, right? Because the reality is that for the government to start, so just to give you an example, we have 25 years of R&D to get to where we are, right? We invested literally billions of dollars to have the technology that we have, a technology that everybody touts as the future, right? Which we are developing, we have been deploying for a decade. So I think that if we go about the way that you said, with the government investment and the government basically starting from scratch to do it, we're going to be way behind. I would not advise that.
Thank you for that. And I think some valuable words coming from one of the few that's been in the industry as long in a vertically integrated situation. So very valuable inputs there. Flavio, any thoughts on that? Would it make sense to have government involvement or backing of a renewable powered gigafactory in various provinces?
I mean, I think Adrian is right. I think the answer is a hybrid. It's yes, it would be great to have the government's balance sheet involved, but not it's an NRC battery factory that does a disservice to the public servants who don't know how to make batteries at scale for transportation use, and it does a disservice to all the great technology and market expertise that the current Canadian companies have and can deploy. What I think the question was had a different filter to it, which was, look, what happens to the natural resources energy sectors out west? Do they get orphaned in this play? I think it's a question for some of the provincial governments out west to say, look, why don't you work with your tax regime? One thing that we don't have in this country anywhere is access to risk capital in the way that American states treat risk capital. And it's part of the reason why we're here. And if I was in Alberta, I might think to myself, how can I use the tax regime to turn around and say to companies that are currently in the oil business or in that supply chain of the oil business, we'll give you a different treatment for your disposable resources, disposable financial resources, to invest in a battery supply chain, and we'll make it aggressive, kind of like the way that Ontario used to have venture capital tax opportunities in the last decade. And yeah, we will fail in some cases, but maybe the economies of the West can help to drive the success of the country in a different way. And if they get aggressive and they move past Ontario and Quebec, the challenge will also be, look, a lot of the technology, the supporting technology, or a lot of the software that's going to drive the next step after EV, which is AV/CV, will find its way out that way.
Sankar, I'd like to actually jump to the next question because I think it speaks to some of what you've discussed so far. Is there, from your understanding, any interest in quantum technology for new material science to drive down cost and increase capability? Or where do you see the opportunities related to technology?
Absolutely. This is a technology play, and that's what I've been saying, that no winner has come out yet. And there's tremendous amount of interesting technology, which some are bottled up, some are coming out, which will differentiate the global dominant player. So absolutely, the energy density is growing as we speak. There's a lot of interesting technology coming out, which doesn't use toxic chemicals, so your capital cost goes down. A lot of interesting technology coming out on electrodes and microstructure, etc., which is creating energy densities and dropping costs. So it is a very, very interesting time, which we are all in, because the technology is still emerging. Absolutely. So it's the winner will be, it normally is the guys who has the technology. And I think, as Flavio is saying, Canada should support those folks. It's a risk. It's always a risk, but Tesla was a risk.
Absolutely. A lot of the discussion today has focused on opportunities related to electric mobility, but surely, as everybody on the line is aware, batteries are being used in residential energy storage applications, in grid storage applications, and many others, which in many cases are using similar raw material inputs, similar precursors, similar active materials, similar cell chemistries. What do you see the market for these adjacent opportunities as being going forward? And is it perhaps an underexploited niche that Canada can tap into, or is it really hinging on the same opportunities and same developments that the EV side of the story is?
So why don't I take a shot at that, Ryan?
Yeah, please, Flavio. Thanks.
Sure. Sankar talks about energy density, and like energy density is the name of the game with any piece of electronics that unplugged electronics that we have. It is, as we go through the Project Arrow process and we triage all the opportunities we have for whose cells and what density we're going to use. A lot of the discussions come down to, look, for a transportation application, you've got to have the cooling, and you've got to have safety, and you've got to build engineering around it for impact and climate. For things like these, you don't have all those elements. It's I coach a baseball team, and working with one of the boys who said to me, look, you're in the car business, it's a science project. One of the things I want to prove out is, how can I have a battery that charges itself? And I said, well, I'm not a physicist, I'm a business guy, but I'll tell you this, when we get to the point of energy density that we all dream of, the 1,000,000-mile batteries, you might never have to charge your phone again. And that might be the answer and the corollary benefit from us actually making a major play, like Sankar said. Pick some winners. And we may all lose from the auto point of view, but no, we built up the capacity to do home storage, and to really do something that Ontario tried, almost 15 years ago with the Green Energy Act to stick. You can collect energy from the sun, from the wind, but if you can't store it and deploy it at the time that you need it, it doesn't work. And so companies like Adrian's are going to be part of that solution. And there are so many benefits. And then the last one to point out is that these cars are going to last forever. The average vehicle lasts 11.8 years right now. Maybe the average EV might last a little bit less, 8 to 10 years, simply because, what are the expectations on range? But we're going to have a hell of a lot of batteries that are going to be able to be redeployable in a very safe sense. And we're going to see a recycling industry kick up here in the 30s that a lot of us are not contemplating. And those batteries will get redeployed in other sectors. And I think we need to keep our eye on that as well.
If I could jump in,
please,
Ryan, and thanks, Flavio. You were talking about storage, stationary storage, but a couple of things I wanted to mention in terms of our battery, because it's interesting. The battery that we produce actually doesn't have any of these politically or socially controversial materials, no cadmium, cobalt, nickels, which is kind of interesting. A lot of companies are moving away from nickel because the expectation that there's going to be shortage and so forth. So like a plus, if you will, for what we're doing in terms of what the material availability of raw materials is in Canada. Now, the way we design our solution for the mobility, for the pack, the module, we also use it and have applied it to a design of a stationary solution. So imagine now we have all of these fleets of cars, going back to the depot, to the garage, and all of a sudden they have to plug it into the grid, right? It's going to create a huge demand of energy that somebody has to supply, right? So if you don't want to have a blackout and things like that, we will need some stationary storage to help buffer, if you will, that energy supply. And so we have a solution for that, and it's something that on a stationary basis we have deployed in Africa, in microgrids, and in Europe. Again, all the product being made in Canada for export. So it is an important part of the equation, how we're going to charge the vehicles until we get to this 1,000,000-mile battery, right? Or Flavio's cell phone that will last forever. I think that in the meantime, we need to fill that gap. And there are technologies, and fortunately, solid state has a higher energy density, which is good, but every technology, every lithium-based technology, if you will, is increasing density. So I think that slowly we're going to get there, but we have to make the stationary application part of the solution.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're almost there, Ryan. Sankar here. So energy, there's a lot of markets, some we call niche, some not. So, I mean, energy storage is a massive market. We are seeing markets in aerospace for our batteries, marine. We have a lot of robots running around with the Electrovaya batteries in Boston, in Washington, D.C., all over the place. So I think whenever the government takes that risk with their balance sheet, it's not a big risk. There is so much demand for good quality batteries.
So an effort directed at EV or directed at stationary will not become a stranded effort. It can
No, it
apply
won't be
to
a
both.
stranded efforts, not a stranded assets,
Yeah.
and the fundamental technology is all there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, excellent point. And I think it rounds us off quite nicely at the end of our discussion here. So I would like to thank all of the panelists for your generosity of time and sharing your wisdom and experience with us. It's obvious that there is an immense opportunity ahead for Canada, you know, in this space that exists between raw materials and EV manufacturing, where we exist at both of those end posts. And it's clear that a lot of work still needs to be done to capitalize on that opportunity. But it's encouraging to see that there are companies like yourselves actively moving in that direction. So the years ahead will no doubt be an exciting time to watch. I'd like to turn it back over to Nino at this time to wrap us up. But I just wanted to thank everybody who's on the line for your attention today, for joining us for this discussion. And again, thank you to the panelists for sharing your time, and thank you to the organizers and sponsors. It's been an honor to be with you today.
Thanks very much, Ryan. And I'll add my thanks to the panel. Superb insights and a great discussion, and an especially big thank you to you, Ryan, for expertly hosting the discussion. And you know, one thing that's consistently coming through this discussion series is the need for action and the need to make decisions and the need for us to move and seize the moment. And it's very clear that moment is now. So thank you all, and thank you to the audience as well for tuning in to be part of it. And to everybody who asked questions, I know that we've had a ton of questions and we haven't been able to answer them all, but unfortunately, just with time being so tight. But thank you for all those that did contribute in that way. A recording of this event will be posted on the Electric Autonomy website along with an editorial summary, and you'll be able to get access to that in the next few days. And I'd also like once again to acknowledge our presenting sponsor, Invest in Canada, for coming on board to support this series. Next week, our 5th episode will be moderated by my colleague, Emma Jarrett, Electric Autonomy's managing editor. That session will be focused on pack and vehicle assembly, an area that's already a significant part of the Canadian economy. So this is a super important part of the series. It's free to register on the Electric Autonomy website. So we invite you to sign up, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, everyone.